I never asked to be born, but my parents, Dane and Dakota Billy, made it clear from the start that I wasn't part of their plan. My name is Paisley, and I'm their second child, the one they didn't want. My older sister, Ember, was the one they cared about. She was their golden child, the one they always celebrated and adored. Growing up in the Billy household was like living in two completely different worlds. Ember's world was full of love, attention, and constant praise. My world, on the other hand, was cold, lonely, and filled with barely disguised resentment. I always felt like an outsider in my own family. One memory that sticks with me to this day is my 8th birthday. I woke up that morning feeling hopeful, thinking maybe this year would be different. Maybe they'd remember. Maybe they'd care. As I walked downstairs, my heart was racing with excitement. But as soon as I entered the kitchen, I realized it was just another ordinary day for my parents. Mom and Dad were sitting at the table, chatting with Ember about her upcoming dance recital. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual even though my heart was sinking. Mom glanced up for a brief moment. "Oh, Paisley, your cereal's in the cupboard," she said, then turned her attention back to Ember. That was it. No happy birthday. No hug. Nothing. I spent the entire day hoping they'd at least mention it, but the hours dragged on without a single word. Finally, at dinner, Dad seemed to remember. "Oh, right. Happy birthday, kid," he muttered while shoveling food into his mouth, not even bothering to look at me. Mom looked surprised. "Is that today?" "I thought it was next week," she said, shaking her head like it didn't matter. That night, I lay in bed clutching the only birthday card I had received. It was from Grandma Raven, the only person who ever seemed to care about me. Her words were simple but powerful. "My dearest Paisley, happy birthday, sweetheart. You bring so much joy to my life. Never forget how special and loved you are. Love always, Grandma." I read that card over and over, trying to believe the words. Grandma's love meant everything to me, but how could I feel special when my own parents barely remembered I existed? School wasn't much better. Parent-teacher conferences were always a painful reminder of how little my parents cared. I'd see other kids with their proud moms and dads, all smiles as they talked to teachers about their progress. But my parents? They never came. "Sorry, Paisley," Mom would say without an ounce of regret. "Ember has a dance competition that day. You understand, right?" I would nod like it didn't bother me, but inside it hurt so much. Every time they prioritized Ember over me, it was like they were saying I didn't matter. The worst moments, though, were when I overheard them talking about me. One night, I was supposed to be asleep, but I could hear their voices drifting upstairs. "I just don't get it," Dad said. "Ember is so bright and talented. Why can't Paisley be more like her?" Mom sighed in agreement. "I know. It's like she doesn't even try. Remember how Ember was reading at 4? Paisley could barely tie her shoes at that age." Their words cut deep, like tiny knives stabbing at my heart. It was a constant reminder that no matter what I did, I'd never be good enough for them. As I got older, I stopped trying to impress them. What was the point? I became quiet and withdrawn, keeping to myself most of the time. The only person who truly saw me for who I was, who truly loved me, was Grandma Raven. Every visit to her cozy little house felt like stepping into a different world. With Grandma, I felt safe and loved. She listened to me, cared about what I had to say, and never compared me to anyone else. I could just be myself around her. When I was 13, I hit my breaking point. Home had become unbearable, and I couldn't take it anymore. One day, with tears streaming down my face, I went to Grandma and poured out my heart. "Grandma," I whispered, barely able to get the words out, Can I live with you?" I held my breath, terrified she might say no. But instead, she pulled me into a warm hug and said, "Oh, sweetheart, of course you can. You'll always have a home with me. And one day, everything I have will be yours." I melted into her arms, feeling a sense of safety I hadn't felt in years. I didn't care about inheriting anything. All I wanted was to feel loved and wanted. When my parents found out about my decision, their reaction didn't surprise me. That tiny old house. Dad scoffed. And she works at the library for peanuts. What can she possibly offer you, Paisley? Mom just shrugged, relief clear on her face. Well, if that's what you want, it'll make things easier for us, she said, as if I was just a burden they were glad to get rid of. Their indifference hurt, but it also confirmed I was making the right choice. They didn't value Grandma's love, but I did. Living with Grandma wasn't always easy. Money was tight, and we often struggled to make ends meet. She worked long hours at the library, and I took on small jobs to help out. But none of that mattered. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged. I felt loved. Grandma showed me that I wasn't invisible, that I mattered, and that I was capable of so much more than my parents ever believed. With her support, I began to find my own strength and discover who I truly was. Living with Grandma felt like stepping into a new, beautiful chapter of my life. For the first time, I felt truly loved and accepted. Grandma never missed a single school event. Whether it was a presentation, a play, or an award ceremony, she was always there, sitting proudly in the front row. She cheered the loudest, clapping her hands and smiling like I was the most amazing person in the world. At home, my drawings and school projects covered her fridge. Every visitor to her house got to hear about her brilliant granddaughter. She'd tell them stories about my accomplishments, big or small, her pride shining brighter than any star. Under her care, I started to change. The shy, quiet girl I used to be began to fade away. For the first time, I felt like I could do anything. I made friends, joined clubs at school, and my grades improved a lot. It was amazing what a little love and encouragement could do. Even though we struggled with money, Grandma made sure I never felt like we were missing anything. She'd sometimes skip meals so I could have a full plate. Our little house might have been old and small, but it was warm and full of care. We didn't have much, but what we did have was enough. Everything finally felt like it was falling into place, until one crisp autumn afternoon. Grandma came home from work looking different. Her face showed a mix of emotions, happiness, sadness, and something else I couldn't quite figure out. She was smiling, but her eyes were shiny with unshed tears. "Paisley, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling as she sat down beside me. "We need to talk. It's about my sister, Marilyn. She passed away unexpectedly." I barely remembered Aunt Marilyn. She was Grandma's sister, a wealthy businesswoman who had been distant from the family for as long as I could remember. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," I said softly, reaching out to hold her hand. Grandma gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "Thank you, my love," she said, her voice steadying. "But there's more." She paused for a moment before continuing. "Marilyn, she left me everything. Her entire fortune. We're millionaires now, sweetheart. Multi-millionaires." I stared at her, not sure I'd heard her right. Millionaires? Us. It felt unreal. Word about Grandma's inheritance spread quickly, and it didn't take long for my parents to come knocking. One evening, there was a firm knock on our door. When Grandma opened it, there they were, Dane and Dakota, standing on the porch with forced smiles and teary eyes. "Raven, Paisley," Mom said, her voice shaking like she was on the verge of tears. "We've made a terrible mistake." Dad nodded, looking more humble than I'd ever seen him. "We've been awful parents, truly awful. But we've realized how wrong we were, and we want to make things right." I stood there frozen, staring at the two people who had ignored me for most of my life. Now they were standing here, begging for a second chance. "Please, Paisley," Mom said, reaching out toward me with trembling hands. "Come home. Let us be the family we should have been all along." I looked at Grandma, feeling torn and unsure. She gave me a kind, understanding smile. "It's your decision, sweetheart," she said gently. "Whatever you choose, I'll support you." I spent days thinking it over. Deep down, I wanted to believe that my parents had changed. Maybe they really did regret everything. Maybe I could finally have the loving family I'd always wanted. With Grandma's blessing, I packed my things and returned to the Billy house. At first, it felt like a dream come true. Mom and Dad were attentive and loving. They came to all my school events, cheering loudly for me just like Grandma used to. They even started giving me thoughtful gifts, not expensive things, but little items that showed they were paying attention to my interests. We began having family game nights, something we'd never done before. I'll never forget the first time Dad ruffled my hair after I won a game of Monopoly. "That's my girl," he said with a proud smile. The warmth that spread through me in that moment was indescribable. The biggest surprise was bedtime. Mom started tucking me in every night, something I had always wished for as a little girl. She'd smooth my hair and kiss my forehead softly. "Good night, sweetheart," she'd whisper. "We love you so much." Even Ember seemed different. She started including me in her plans, introducing me to her friends, and giving me advice about boys and makeup. For the first time, I felt like her sister, not her shadow. I wanted to believe it was all real, that my family had truly changed and finally saw me for who I was. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts. Why now? Why only after Grandma came into money? I tried to silence that voice, convincing myself that they had really changed. I called Grandma often, excitedly telling her how happy I was and how wonderful things were at home. She always seemed glad for me, but there was a hint of concern in her voice every time. "Just remember, Paisley," she'd say gently. "You'll always have a home with me, no matter what." Life in the Billy house settled into a new routine. As time passed, Ember, always the golden child, graduated high school with honors and headed off to a fancy college. My parents threw her a huge graduation party, complete with decorations, speeches, and a catered dinner. Watching them beam with pride at Ember's achievements brought back old feelings of being invisible. I couldn't help but wonder, had things really changed? Or was I just the backup child, the one they turned to because their golden girl had left the nest? Grandma's life had taken a wonderful turn. She moved into a beautiful new house and finally retired from her job at the library. As for me, things were looking better than ever. I was 19 now, doing well in school with a close group of friends. Life had become brighter, and to top it off, I had started dating Coulson, a sweet boy from my chemistry class. When he asked me out, I couldn't believe it. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. One Thursday evening, Coulson and I had planned to meet at the local diner for a date. I spent hours getting ready, nervously picking out outfits and redoing my makeup. My heart was racing with a mix of excitement and anticipation. When I got to the diner, I couldn't stop smiling. But after waiting for a while, my phone buzzed. I eagerly grabbed it, hoping it was Coulson saying he was on his way. Instead, the message read, "Sorry, Paisley. Something came up. Can't make it tonight." My heart sank, and the excitement I'd felt all day vanished. Disappointed, I left the diner and headed home earlier than I had planned. I used my key to quietly let myself in, not wanting to wake anyone since Mom and Dad probably thought I'd be out late. As I passed by Dad's study, I heard voices. I was about to call out and let them know I was home, but something in Mom's tone stopped me. She sounded frustrated, almost angry. "I don't know how much longer I can keep up this act," she said sharply. "I never wanted her in the first place, and pretending to love her is exhausting." Her words froze me in place. My heart started pounding in my chest. Pretending to love me? I felt my whole body go cold. Slowly, I took out my phone and hit the record button. I couldn't stop myself. I had to hear the rest. Dad's voice came next, low and calculating. "We just have to be patient. Once Mom passes, all the money will go to Paisley. If we play our cards right, we can convince her to share it with us. Just think about the life we could have." My stomach twisted, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Everything I had believed about my parents, their newfound love, their support, their warmth, was a lie. It had all been an act, carefully played out for Grandma's money. Tears welled up in my eyes as their cruel words replayed in my head. Every bedtime kiss, every proud smile, every kind word, it was all fake. My chest ached with betrayal as I realized the family I thought I had finally found didn't really exist. Unable to listen any longer, I turned and walked back to the front door. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I opened it loudly and slammed it shut. "I'm home," I called out, forcing my voice to sound normal. Within moments, Mom and Dad appeared, their faces lighting up with what I now knew were fake smiles. "Paisley, sweetie, you're back early," Mom said, her brow furrowed with what I could now see was pretend concern. "Everything okay?" Dad added, his voice dripping with false sincerity. I wanted to scream at them, to call them out right then and there. But instead, I forced a weak smile. "Coulson canceled," I muttered. Something came up. Their reactions were flawless. Too flawless. Mom clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Oh, that's a shame, honey." Dad gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Don't worry. There'll be other dates." I had to fight the urge to pull away from his touch. That night, I lay in bed replaying their conversation in my head, their words cutting me all over again. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't stay there anymore. I waited until both of their cars left the driveway. Then, I packed as quickly as I could, throwing clothes and precious keepsakes into my duffel bag. Without looking back, I left the house that had never felt like home and made my way to Grandma's. When I showed up at her doorstep, bags in hand, her eyes widened in shock. "Paisley, what's wrong, sweetheart?" she asked, pulling me inside. I couldn't hold it in any longer. All the emotions I had bottled up spilled out as I burst into tears. Between sobs, I managed to pull out my phone and play the recording. As Grandma listened, her expression changed from shock to disbelief, and finally to a deep anger I had never seen before. Those conniving, heartless, she stopped herself, taking a deep breath to calm down. Then, she looked at me with soft, loving eyes. "Don't you worry, honey. We'll give them a surprise they'll never forget." She pulled me into a tight hug, and for the first time since overhearing that awful conversation, I felt safe. By evening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Mom, Dad, and even Ember were calling nonstop, leaving voicemails and sending texts. The messages were all the same: apologies, explanations, and pleas for me to come home. "Paisley, please, we're so sorry," Mom's voicemail said, her voice cracking. "We didn't mean it. It was just a misunderstanding. Come back," Dad's text read. "We can fix this. We're still your parents." Even Ember chimed in, sending me a long message about how much she missed me and how the family wasn't the same without me. But their words didn't move me anymore. I had seen the truth, and I knew their sudden concern wasn't out of love. It was out of fear of losing Grandma's fortune. Sitting in Grandma's warm, cozy living room, I realized that I didn't need their fake love or empty promises. I had Grandma, and that was more than enough. I ignored their calls and texts for as long as I could. My phone buzzed constantly, but I wasn't ready to face them. Finally, after what felt like hours of endless buzzing, I picked up. "Hello," I said coldly, keeping my voice steady. "Paisley." "Oh, thank God." Mom's frantic voice came through the line. "Where are you? We've been so worried." The irony of her words almost made me laugh. Worried about me? They hadn't cared for years. "I'm with Grandma," I replied calmly. "And we'd like to invite you over tomorrow for a family conversation." There was a long silence on the other end before Mom stammered. "Of course. We'll be there, Paisley." "Honey, whatever's wrong, we can fix it." I hung up before she could finish. Fix it? They had no idea what was about to happen. The next evening, tension hung thick in the air as the doorbell rang. Grandma gave my hand a reassuring squeeze before going to answer it. When she opened the door, my parents stepped inside, their faces plastered with fake concern. "Paisley, sweetheart," Mom began, reaching out to me with an overly warm smile. I took a step back, my expression unreadable. Confusion flickered across her face, but she quickly hid it. "Please, have a seat," Grandma said firmly, gesturing to the dining room. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of authority that made it clear she was in control. "We have a lot to discuss." As my parents sat down, I noticed Dad's eyes darting around the room, taking in the elegant furniture, expensive decor, and the signs of Grandma's newfound wealth. He cleared his throat uneasily. "What's this all about?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Is everything okay? Without a word, I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. The room was filled with the sound of their own voices, cold, calculating, and cruel. They spoke about manipulating me, waiting for Grandma to pass, and taking her money. Every word was like a knife, and I could see the color draining from their faces as they listened. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, and Dad seemed to shrink in his chair. For a moment, they were too stunned to speak. Then, all at once, they started talking over each other, their voices a mess of excuses and apologies. "Paisley, we didn't mean it," Mom cried. "It was just a stupid mistake." "Listen, we were under a lot of stress," Dad began, but his words sounded empty. Grandma raised her hand, silencing them. When she spoke, her voice trembled with disappointment and controlled anger. "I truly believed you had changed," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "I was even considering dividing my estate among all of you." She paused, her gaze hard and unwavering. "But now, I can say with certainty that everything I have will go to Paisley alone." Her words hit them like a brick wall. Mom's face crumpled as the realization set in. Dad clenched his jaw, looking as though he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. "Please, you have to understand," Mom begged, tears streaming down her face. "We made a mistake, but we do love Paisley. We can fix this." But when their begging got them nowhere, their tone shifted. Dad's face twisted with anger. "You can't do this," he snapped. "We're her parents. We have rights. We'll make sure you never see her again, Ravens." Their threats didn't faze me. For the first time in my life, I felt calm and sure of what I needed to do. "I'm filing for emancipation," I said, my voice steady. "Grandma will be my legal guardian. You don't have any power over me anymore." The shock on their faces was almost comical if it weren't so painful. They looked between me and Grandma, unable to process what was happening. Their carefully laid plans hadn't just failed, they had completely backfired. "I think it's time for you to leave," Grandma said firmly, standing and gesturing toward the door. Her tone left no room for argument. For a moment, they hesitated, as if trying to think of one last way to salvage the situation. But there was nothing they could say. Defeated, they walked out, and the door closed behind them with a finality that felt like the end of a long, painful chapter. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Grandma pulled me into a warm hug, and for the first time in days, I felt the weight on my shoulders begin to lift. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings and court appearances. Grandma hired the best lawyers to help me with the emancipation process and to officially transfer guardianship to her. I had naively thought that my parents would give up once they were exposed. I was wrong. Dane and Dakota fought hard to maintain control over me, and by extension, access to Grandma's fortune. But our lawyers built a strong case, using years of neglect and emotional abuse as evidence. The recording of their cruel conversation was the final nail in their coffin. It was impossible for them to argue their way out of it, and the judge saw right through their desperate attempts to play the part of caring parents. In the end, the court granted my emancipation. I was finally free, and Grandma officially became my guardian. The fight was exhausting, but it was worth it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a future filled with love, safety, and possibility, free from manipulation and lies. Grandma and I returned home that day, ready to start the next chapter of our lives together. The pain of the past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. With Grandma by my side, I was ready to build a new life, one filled with hope and happiness. The case against my parents wasn't built on just the recording, it was much more than that. Teachers from my old schools testified about their neglect. Mrs. Jasper, my third-grade teacher, shared a heartbreaking memory of the time I won the school's spelling bee. It was a big moment for me, but neither of my parents showed up to watch me receive my award. Neighbors also came forward. Mr. Ellis, who had lived next door to us for years, spoke about the extravagant birthday parties my sister Ember always had, complete with decorations, cakes, and guests, while mine went completely uncelebrated. The courtroom listened to story after story, each piece painting a clear picture of the neglect and favoritism I had endured. Finally, the day of the final hearing arrived. As we waited in the courtroom for the judge to appear, the air was thick with tension. Then I noticed someone slip quietly through the back door. It was Ember. When Ember took the stand, I was shocked. Her words shattered any illusion of family loyalty I might have still clung to. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I knew about my parents' plan to use Paisley to gain access to my grandmother's money." The courtroom erupted into whispers, but I sat frozen, unable to believe what I was hearing. Ember continued, her tone calm and matter-of-fact. The sudden kindness, the sisterly bonding, it was all part of the act. Our parents thought it would be more convincing if I played along. Her eyes met mine briefly, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret. But it was too late. Her words were the final blow, destroying any hope I had of mending my relationship with my family. The judge's decision came quickly and decisively. Grandma was granted full guardianship, and I was legally emancipated from Dane and Dakota Billy. As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a deep sense of freedom. Grandma put her arm around my shoulders and pulled me close. "It's over, sweetheart," she said softly. "You're safe now." I nodded, unable to speak because of the lump in my throat. It was over, yes, but it was also a new beginning, a chance to build a life free from manipulation and conditional love. As we drove home, I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of my childhood pass by. I wasn't just leaving behind the family I was born into. I was moving towards something far more meaningful. The mansion I now shared with Grandma wasn't just a house. It was a safe haven where I could finally breathe, grow, and heal. Grandma, true to her word, gave me every opportunity to succeed. But more than the material comforts or tutors she provided, it was her constant love and encouragement that made the biggest difference. "You can be anything you want to be, Paisley," she'd say with a proud smile. "The world is yours." With her support, I focused on my studies like never before. I wasn't trying to prove my worth to indifferent parents anymore. Instead, I was building a future for myself on my own terms. Grandma and I went on adventures I had never dared to dream of before. In England, I fell in love with art and architecture. On a safari in Africa, I discovered a passion for wildlife photography. Every trip and experience uncovered a new part of myself, showing me a world of possibilities I had never imagined. But the most important work didn't happen in those exciting places. It happened in the quiet office of Dr. Harper, my therapist. Twice a week, I sat on her cozy couch and worked through years of emotional pain. "It's okay to be angry," she told me gently one day. "It's okay to grieve the family you should have had." Over time, I began to trust again, not just others but myself. I started to see my own worth and understand that I deserved love and respect simply for being me. As my high school graduation approached, I found myself reflecting on the difficult journey that had brought me to this point. The family I had lost, the struggles I had faced, and the strength I had gained, it all led me here. The family I was born into was no longer part of my life. There were no cards, no calls, no contact from Mom, Dad, or Ember. They were now just characters in a painful chapter of my past. But losing them gave me something far more valuable: self-respect, inner strength, and the unconditional love of a grandmother who had been more of a parent to me than my biological parents ever were. The night before graduation, Grandma and I sat on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I'm so proud of you, Paisley," Grandma said, reaching over to hold my hand. "You've been through so much, and look at you now. You're stronger and more beautiful than ever." Tears welled up in my eyes, but for the first time, they were tears of joy. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma. You saved me." She shook her head, smiling softly. "No, sweetheart. You saved yourself. I just gave you a safe place to do it." The next day, as I stood on stage accepting my diploma, I heard Grandma's cheers above everyone else. A sense of peace washed over me. The pain of my past no longer defined me. Instead, I felt excitement for the bright future ahead. I had lost the family I was born into, but I gained something far more precious: the freedom to become who I was always meant to be. As I looked out at the crowd, my eyes met Grandma's. In that moment, I knew that whatever came next, I wouldn't face it alone.